So I'm going to be talking about tone and documentation, and I feel a little bit bad because Tom's already stolen a bit of what I was going to do, because this is very clearly Iceland. It's not relevant to my presentation, I'm just really into Iceland. To make this presentation make sense, I'll tell you a little bit about my background and a little bit about what I'm doing now. I'm from a humanities background, did some linguistics, and about a year ago started teaching myself to program. And I work for Majestic SEO, and they're great, great folks there. And one day they found out that I'd been learning how to program, and immediately put me to work on the documentation, which is, it's not going well, but it's going. And looking around for examples on the net, I really noticed that tone in documentation varied incredibly wildly. Some people really stuck to their branded tone. Some people just went really flat for technical writing. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. And I think most folks so far have had really great hands-on technical talks. This is what you can do. Here's a tool. And I'm actually afraid that most of this is going to be about feelings. So this is how I felt about documentation in general, and I think it's the way a lot of technical writers feel about tone. So you've got folks who are coming from a very technical background, if you're developers, having to sort of add some feelings to it. Or you've got folks who are coming from more of a writing background going into the technical part, and it's trying to balance tone in with the more technical language. Whether or not it's an art or a science, so dealing with tone in documentation, you really want it to be yes or no. This is right or this is wrong. Unfortunately, it's never as easy as that. The best I've found so far is giving it to a bunch of people and seeing what sounds weird. The first thing, the most important thing you can do with tone is reinforce your brand's voice. So everybody works for somebody who's got a branded voice. And yeah, we get told all the time that brands are important, brand engagement, brand voice, brand. And really, all you get out of that is sort of this weird, sleazy feeling. I cringe every time someone says brand to me. But it is one of those things you can really do with tone, is you can echo your brand's voice if it's important, if it's relevant. Just be careful to make sure it doesn't seem too sleazy. In reinforcing your brand's tone, you're really looking to show users first who you are. Are you really accessible? Are you really snuggly? Are you sort of very technical and advanced? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to be aiming to broadcast what you want them to feel about you. So the takeaway that you want them to have at first is, oh, X brand, their documentation is snuggly. In addition to reinforcing your brand's voice or really expressing how you want them to feel about them, we can do a couple of extra things that are pretty great. We can communicate who your intended audience is. So who I think is going to be engaging with this documentation, who I expect to be involved. And you can also communicate your expectations to them. So say, based on the tone in this documentation, and based on what I've made available, how do I think you will, or how do I think you might use this product? And one thing I think is really valuable, and I wish people would use tone for it a bit more often, is you can indicate the level of interactivity you're willing to maintain with users. So if you say, we've got Mozillans in here, great community, and you really see a lot of tone around inclusiveness, exchange. You've got them talking a lot about we will, talk to us. Really, really great tone for communication, and I wish I'd included it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is talking to your audience and sort of assuming who they might be. And I think this might be one of the most difficult things for tone, is you've got to be willing to go through and update and change this. So if I'm saying, I expect you to be an advanced user of this framework, I expect you to be a new user, I expect you to be something. communicating audience expectations, oftentimes we'll be talking about the level of skill we want them to have or expect them to have, and the level of investment we want them to take with the product, either financially or the investment of time. Whether or not we're expecting I suppose everybody's expecting individuals to interact with it, but whether or not you're addressing them as an individual organization, and whether or not you're going to be talking to commercial or non-commercial users. So if you're having documentation geared at businesses, it's going to be very, very different than talking to somebody maybe in the open source community. I think it's really, really easy to get this wrong. So problems you can encounter with setting user expectations, so your audience expectations through tone, is it's so easy to misjudge your audience. I think somebody earlier talked about they found teenagers who were using their product, and I think you're really likely to be surprised with who your audience is, and misjudging it can really limit them. If you say, I expect very high level users to be using this, just by setting that expectation, you might be locking out some of the more basic users who would be involved. Which is our next thing, accidentally limiting your audience through the wrong choice of tone. I think this is something I'm very, very guilty of, and I think this is really difficult for everybody, is you tend to write for yourself. When you're writing documentation, you write something that you think is useful, that you think is relevant, and it's very difficult to divorce yourself from your users. And I think this presentation is a terrible example of this. It's got a bit of meme in it. Using cultural limited references can exclude potential users. So that funny in-joke, that funny meme picture, might mean a little bit less to users from a different culture. Case in point. So, we know who your users are, we know who your users might be. We've sort of got the tone down for who we think might be involved. But now we're going to look at what we want them to do or what we expect them to do. And I put this picture in every presentation. It's not relevant. So setting expectations. We're going to set the tone for what we want users to carry into their interaction with the product. Are we dealing with something new, something exciting, and we want really, really excited users being excited as they use it? Or do we want somebody who's coming in and wanting to get the job done and letting them get the job done? So looking at the level of creativity, so we're setting expectations for our users in the tone. What kind of limits do we want to put on them? And explicitly you'll say, you can do this, you can't do this. But whether or not to open up the language, open up the tone and say, we would be excited if you could try this, here are some examples of strange things. Or do you want to keep it really locked down? And thinking about whether or not you expect your users to conform to a level of professionalism, or whether or not you expect them to be in a specific niche. Are they going to be using this for this specific use case, or are they going to be doing some weird stuff with it? And the last one, I've seen a couple times, but don't really see it as often as I would. Are you inviting them to try and break something? So are you looking for users to be really engaged with the product and try and shake as many bugs at it as possible? So I think for commercial products, we tend to tone the tone down and discourage them from breaking things if possible. When you're setting expectations for what you expect them to do, we can also talk about what we want them to do in the tone. So we could, really opening that up. As documentarians, you know what your products might be capable of. And being able to take a look at that and say, I think we could do more. I'm going to use our tone to encourage users to do more. Challenges in this, very, very similar to challenges in identifying the user base. Setting too narrow a scope is really going to limit people if you say, I expect you to do this, I'm going to use limiting tone, we're going to keep it small. You might be keeping people from doing some really great, crazy things with it. Similarly, setting too wide a range of expectations can really freak people out. If anybody's using Raspberry Pis at the moment? Yep. For new users, less technical users, Raspberry Pi documentation is terrifying. Because you get to the page and they're like, you can do anything! And that is not helpful. Similarly, and I think this is one thing Raspberry Pi does well, is trying to set multiple levels of user expectation can get messy and stressful and pretty weird. Say, oh, are you new? You could do these things. Oh, are you an experienced user? You can do anything! And be a bit less freaked out by it. So setting communication expectations. Depending on who you are, you've got very, very different resources for support, different resources for engagement, and really want to do different levels of it. If you are an organization that's open source, that's public facing, and you want to talk to them and you want a community, you've really got to get the tone down. And if you have 2 people running support and they're busy and they're tired, you want to sort of lock that down a little bit more. So setting the tone for user interaction, ask yourself a couple questions before you start that. What kind of resources are you going to be making available? If you've got 2 people on support for a major product, maybe keep the tone more limited. Maybe say, contact us if. If you've got tons of people, if you've got a volunteer base, say, we'd love to talk to you. And we'll be looking at some examples, because so far it's a bit wishy-washy. Are you building a community? And how accessible? Do you want to be known by names? Do you want to be sort of very, very transparent? And are you looking for public or private communications? Things like find us on Twitter versus email a support ticket. And we'll be taking a look at examples, because I think that's the only way tone makes sense. I'm such a buffer groupie. And I'm mostly a buffer groupie because of the tone. Here we designed Buffer to offer you a personal, more efficient solution to handle sharing on social media. They're talking to you, they're lovely, and they make your life easier with a smarter way to schedule great content you find. So we've got a lot of trying to make a personal connection with language. You, we. And in their documentations, they've managed to stay on point with this while delivering relevant information. I don't have a laser pointer, but I think the best example... I'm not ready to deal with that. If I can call your guys' attention to questions and problems, because I think this is one of the best examples I've seen with setting expectations for communication in tone. But they're saying if you have any issues, anything goes weird, you can contact us. We've got a great private route, say we've got a one-to-one connection, or you can get us on Twitter. You can call us out publicly for what's going wrong. I think this is great. We're really, really echoing the brand's voice in openness and transparency, and really looking to create a personal one-on-one interaction with users. Really great if you've got a great support team. If you're a tiny company with 5 people, just, does anybody use Ember? Does anybody like Ember? I love their tone. Yeah. Really, really love the tone in Ember. They're talking about built with the developer in mind, get your job done. Really, really great, really casual. And their documentation is great as well. I'm desperately in love with their documentation, and it makes me wish I loved Ember. So here we've got the documentation laid out as guides. And right from the start, we're assuming that you are a new user, you're maybe new to programming, and we've got things like, I knew I was not ready for the laser pointer. We've got things like building awesome web applications. So we've got this very casual, very conversational tone that manages not to be annoying and ham-fisted and patronizing. I think Ember is one of the best examples for tone use that's really, I guess, on brand and not creepy. I will be looking at creepy in a second. Wikipedia is great. I think everybody's got that sort of hive mind Wikipedia voice in their head. So the first 2 sentences are explaining what something is, then a bunch of dates and names, and then links to other things. Wikipedia. Wikipedia does an amazing job of echoing this in the documentation in a way that makes it accessible for developers who want to get things done, and also really, really great for people who want to learn more about documentation. Here we've got it saying, we're looking at a snipper and they're talking about the endpoints. In the most Wikipedia sentence ever, they say, this is the endpoint. And we're going to go a little further. We'll say, it's like a homepage. So we've got 4 people, brand new, just getting into it. This is what this is. And then as you move down a little bit further, what we're going to be able to use. So clearly separating out the information we need as developers to get things done with very, very accessible language for folks who might just be getting started. CoffeeScript, I don't have a before and after because these guys, their branding is their documentation. Does anybody use CoffeeScript? Does anybody like CoffeeScript? Okay. Their tone, I imagine they don't have as much support available. They aren't as accessible. They're not as cuddly. They don't want you to come and play with them as a new user, maybe as someone who's new to development. And here we're just saying, it's a little language. That's nice, it's not too ambitious. And it's going to talk to us conversationally. Oh, that's cake. But it's not going to give us a lot of comforting language. It's not going to give us tone that makes us feel safe as new users. It's not going to say, hey, if you have any questions, come get in touch. I'm not hearing you, me. It's not looking for a personal connection. So we've been looking at examples of folks that keep on tone, so keep their branded voice and do a really good job. And we're going to take a look at when it's important to divorce from your voice. And this is actually the least violent divorce cake I could find. So you need to divorce from your branded tone when the audience for documentation and your main products diverge. When the branded tone is inappropriate, which happens a lot. And when the branded tone suggests a level of support or interactivity that you're not willing to provide for people using the documentation. So if you've got a public-facing product that, yay, we're willing to help anytime, but you don't really have that available for developers, great time to divorce. Does anybody know Yelp? What, really?
Yeah.
All right. Yelp has a very, very distinct branded voice. They are very happy. And it's the fun, and I'm not very happy with their tone. It's very cheerful, very bouncy, and a little bit patronizing. They want you to be having fun, yay, yay, yay. And when you get to the development documentation, they just kill it. You don't want to hear about how much fun you should be having. You want to hear about how to get stuff done quickly, and go back to work, I suppose. So here, we don't see the word fun, we don't see the word awesome, we don't see the word hipster, which they seem to be putting in everything now. We've just got the Yelp 2.0 API enables access to it. Very, very flat, no tone at all. And you can send feedback, but they're not really going to initiate a conversation. Hey, get in touch anytime. None of that. They're just like, you have a problem, send it to us. So you've got 2 big options when you have branded voice that doesn't work for your documentation. You can divorce, you can just cut them apart, or you can dilute it out a bit. Facebook has a very unique branded voice, which seems more and more to be like, hey, we're Facebook, we have your family. I bet you're wondering about your family. So yeah, they are a little bit creepy, but they know all about us, so I'm not going to complain too much. So Facebook, wow, reach out, do these things, personal connections. They're not going to completely get rid of that in documentation. They are going to sort of water that down and make it a little bit less stalkery. You don't want to tell developers that you have their family, but you do want to talk to them in identifiable language. So we are using really, really on-brand words. We're talking about sharing. We're talking about social plugins. But we're not giving pictures of your aunt in any of the corners. So you really, when you get to this page, you break out of all of the Facebook stalker units. If you did not pay attention to this, if you've been playing Doge 2048 on your phone the whole time, this is the only thing I want you to pay attention to. When you're writing, when you think about tone, just take a minute and ask, who are my users? Who am I talking to with this voice? And what do I expect them to be doing? And how much interaction do I want to promise? How much do I want to deal with them? And more Iceland. If you care about the Learned program, it's close to clever.com. And if you want to see the nice people who pay me, it's Majestic SEO. That's about it.
Cool. Do you have some questions?
Hi, Jessica. So I wondered, what are the biggest issues you've run into creating documentation for Majestic?
Our original documentation was written by a non-native speaker of English. Between that and dealing with my own shortcomings technically, so getting up to snuff with interacting with the API to be able to write the documentation for it. It's also not a very cuddly product, so keeping the friendly, we're here for you tone out of it, to be honest.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, so when you talk about brand and tone, right, you're talking about, because I look at it from more of a technical documentation perspective, right? So for example, one of our guiding lines when you write technical documentations is you have to keep it as dry as possible with zero personality, because you have, let's say, a lot of people contributing to the same documentation. You don't want it to look like it was written by 10 different people.
Yeah.
But a lot of the examples that you gave were more of the sort of end user web apps and things like that it looks like you need a little bit of that marketing writing touch.
Yes.
So how do you deal with the differences in that to get people who are both capable of writing that technical part, but still maintaining some sort of personality?
That's really difficult, and it really becomes a question of whether you want to, whether it's desirable. So tone for public facing stuff, if you say, I want you using this, I need you using this, I'm marketing this to you, because a lot of it is about selling. Or if it's an internal thing where you want to keep the tone very, very flat, very accessible, and say, you have to use this. I'm not going to dress this up. So especially for community-based documentation where you've got tons of people contributing, I think in that case maybe things like style guides, which strip all of the personality out. Most of the personality out.
Personalities to style guides.
Depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, you can offer tone suggestions, you can't make people follow it.
Similarly, is there like a tone dictionary? Where it's like, I want to be 20% snuggly, and like these are the words you should use, right? Like, is there a way to map tone onto
Not
words?
that I've found. So the best way I've found to see whether or not you're on track or whether or not you're not is to show it to people who are going to be using it and people who have no idea what it's doing. So just user feedback. I haven't really found a great tool that says, oh, this word that makes people uncomfortable, or this word, yeah, it makes people think of cotton candy. Has anybody else found sort of? Ooh.
I don't know about a specific tool.
So I don't know about a specific tool for this, but the area of research you're thinking about is sentiment analysis.
Okay.
And there's like big news corporations use it to analyze Twitter, to analyze sentiment about news stories they put out.
Yeah,
And
Sensible does a really good job.
You could use something similar for your dogs.
Ooh.
So,
Ooh, I might have
so
a conversation with
you
you
would run
later.
the tool on your dogs and it will tell you what kind of feelings it induces.
I've had mixed results dealing with like sentiment feedback. So it's possibly because I'm a buffer groupie, but I use Sendible at the moment, and they have sort of positive and negative ratings for feedback. And it's clever. It's just not quite people clever yet.
Any more questions before the next talk?
Basically in the same vein, but slightly less specific. Everyone here, I assume, is using stats to analyze who their users are and which part they're actually reading. Or I assume so. Is that true? Broadly? Yeah, I mean, especially in open source projects, that can even be a legal issue, so we haven't been doing that either. I was just making assumptions that aren't true, so there you go.